All right, good evening. This open meeting of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Task Force is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. The order allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. For this meeting, the DEI task force is convening by Google Meet as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please be sure to press *6 to mute your device. The meeting will not feature public comment. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. I'll try with my camera again, and if I lose it, I'll have to turn it back off. So for the first agenda item, For the first agenda item, we have approved the minutes from the last two meetings. So if we could have a motion to approve the minutes from the 7/12 meeting.
A motion to move.
Second.
Who's taking notes today?
Louise.
Louise, okay. Louise, did you get both of those?
I did.
Great, thank you. And may I have a motion to approve the minutes from August 9th?
I make a motion to approve the minutes of 8/9.
Thank
I'll
you.
second the motion.
Thank you. So for our next agenda item, we're going to have three different subcommittees present their recommendations / final report. We'll have each of the subcommittees present. In between, we'll have opportunity for comments, questions, etc. And yeah, we'll move along. So I have the first one listed as employment. Is employment ready? Would you like to start, or would you like somebody else to start? Rich,
I might as well go
you,
ahead.
I guess.
See if I could present. So you want me to just go ahead and present my?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing really set in stone, however you'd like to present. Maybe just go over a high level. I don't expect you to read word for word what was written and submitted, but maybe a high level. And if anybody had an opportunity to look over it prior to the meeting, they can, jump in with questions, comments, suggestions.
Okay.
Your volume's just a little low. I don't know if it's just me.
A little low. Is that better?
Yeah, slightly.
Is that better?
That's good.
No. Hello?
Yep, that's good. Thanks, Rich.
Is that better?
Yep.
Okay. I think I need new headphones. Okay, so we broke down our recommendations to go with our the 4 groupings. We started with policy. So our first recommendation that the town departments should review and rewrite their policies and educate their employees with a DEI lens. I know one thing, I don't know if we need to clarify DEI lens. I don't know if other people use those kind of terms. The second recommendation for policy, they should work through their HR representatives to be more consistent. And then after initial implementation, summits should be held with various departments, and we added the best way to phrase it, but the future standing DEI committee on a yearly basis. So the basic summary of the results: policies are more explicit. Policies and training go beyond compliance, and standard policy sections are utilized along with training that can be shared across the town departments. And then in our latest meeting, we added HR policies are available for public review.
So what was that last part, that they're available?
For public review,
Public review?
we thought, I think the school committee is pretty good about that, but it's hard to find things on the website. So I think it goes along with some of the other recommendations, maybe from the story committee of, or the, I forget which one, but just updating the website more.
Rich, what was the recommendation between conduct summits of departments with future standing DEI committee on a yearly basis and make HR policies available for public review? I missed something in between those two.
Let's see.
Thanks.
There was not. There was only 3 recommendations, so that was our 3rd recommendation.
Okay, thanks.
We hold summits, and then the other ones were results.
So what was make HR policies available for public review, a result or recommendation?
That was a result. HR
Okay,
policies
thanks.
are available for public review. That's something we added in a meeting. And the other thing from the ones that we sent out, we decided to be more correct, or anytime we said departments, we changed it to town departments, just, or the word agencies to town departments for consistency.
So Rich, so we don't have your most up-to-date, is that correct?
Yes, correct. We had a meeting after, but we didn't make too many changes.
Okay, no, that's fine. I just wanted to.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to handle it the way things.
That's fine. If you can just send it to Taylor, please, after the meeting, just so that the most updated one is there for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Are you done so we can start taking questions?
Sure, that was the first set of recommendations.
Okay.
So if we want to take questions on those, so that was policy related.
Okay. So Paul, I see your hand is up. Go for it.
So I'm not sure if he just said policy related, so maybe they have another category for this, but I was wondering if you had considered anything more quantifiable, like increasing from right now we have a 2% diverse workforce to 5% in the next 5 years or whatever. Did you?
Yes. So
did you put anything that, or are you just trying to leave them a much more broad?
That was policies. Then we have a whole section on recruitment and applications. And then we have a section on hiring itself. And that's where we do have someone, I think someone had a comment that we, let's see. Where did we make the?
Maybe the best thing to do is to read out all of them so we know what all your recommendations are, and then we can.
That's why I wasn't sure if we want to go section by section.
I think that way we know.
Okay.
You can see for me, and at least for me anyway. If anybody else wants them by section.
Okay, so that was policy. Then we had our other issue was recruitment efforts do not result in a diverse pool. Recommendation 1, the town departments must reach out to a broader applicant pool by seeking out organizations with a higher percentage of diversity. The town departments will utilize methods such as internships, apprenticeships, co-ops, and so on to encourage diverse applicants. And if a recruitment agency is used, they must be given a target for the share of the applicant pool representing diverse applicants. As we said, we're kind of trying to match to the Worcester County instead of the local community, since that's where we figured the applicants would be more, well, that's where they're coming from, and not just stick to the town demographics. And then our last recommendation in that section was the town departments should standardize systems for collecting and maintaining job application data. And the results would be a pool of affinity groups and associations affiliated with various protected classes should be developed. Data is gathered to form a baseline for current diversity in recruitment and maintained to show progress. And diversity in recruitment matches the diversity in the Worcester County. And then we had a section on hiring. We referenced the school initiative to help out with people that are on the substitute list. So if there are other agencies or other departments that have licensing requirements, that they should try to use that model. Our other recommendation is hiring managers in the town shall aim to interview candidates representing all protected classes if available. And then the interview panel makeup should be diverse. And I have consider waiver, someone did not like the word waiver, for police and fire department from using civil service. I think that was also a recommendation from the safety committee. And then another recommendation is succession plans must take into consideration the overall diversity objectives. Then we mentioned volunteer roles should also consider diversity. And our result there was within 5 years, by 2026, the demographics of the employees of the town will reflect the demographics of Worcester County based on averages. Data collection will be enhanced to ensure diversity metrics are being tracked and maintained. And one thing we did add that's not there that from our meeting is we had something about union contracts to be reviewed and negotiated with a DEI lens when possible. Then our last set related to training. And we said that the departments should ensure that employees and managers get at least 8 hours of annual diversity training and at least every other year address bias and unconscious bias. Those in customer service roles will be provided cultural training, and we recommended a separate volunteer task force committee be formed to improve training. And so the results or training plans are updated and enforced. Since the hiring is done by current members of the town departments, the training aspects or lack thereof cannot be overlooked. And those doing the hiring must go beyond looking at training just as a compliance component. And a volunteer committee formed to assist departments with training. So those are all of our recommendations.
Thanks, Rich. I'll open it up for questions, comments. Lindsay?
I really want to appreciate you, Rich. Thanks for putting all that together. There's a lot there. You may have said, can folks hear me okay? Okay, great. You may have said it, but one of the pieces about collecting the data is sort of like a transparency piece in it. So is there something about that the hiring data, for instance, be publicly available on an annual basis, or is there anything of that sort? Or I'd
Yeah.
throw it off to your committee to consider that possibility.
Yeah, we put that in there a couple times about that they, where was it? That it should be available
Okay, great.
on a town website or something. I forget where they.
Right.
Yeah, Rich, if I may extend, yes, Lindsay, to your point, we thought of sharing, the what kind of candidate pool we are getting, and kind of publish that data analysis on the town website so that we can see the response and what kind of racial, ethnic background candidates we are able to attract, so that we can weigh our success failure criteria based on what kind of communication channels are working versus not working. So yes, we did think about that, and that's in a draft mode for us.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindsay. Louise?
Sorry, Ruth, did you call on me?
Yep.
Okay, is training currently a key performance indicator for town employees?
A key performance indicator? I don't know if we could say
Yes,
that. I know
is it
from
monitored?
That's an
Is it
interesting question.
monitored
I know from the
as a
interviews with,
way? I'm sorry, you broke up, Rich. I didn't hear what you said.
I know from the interviews with people, it was not stressed. And I know several between Selco saying it was minimal to the town saying it's done, but it's not done to a great extent that I don't think it's a key.
Louise, are you talking about racial equity and diversity training specifically?
Well, the first question speaks to, is training in general a key performance indicator, for example, in performance evaluations? And the second, what follows logically from that is, if it is, then equity training will also be a part of that. And if it isn't, perhaps then training completion should become a key performance indicator. I mean, that is an employment issue.
Thanks for the clarification.
You're welcome.
That's a great point, Louis.
So Rich, maybe before, or whoever's working on it, before you send the most updated version to Taylor, with the latest things that you've added, maybe if your team wants to think about how to incorporate the KPIs into that.
Right, I took a note.
Awesome, thanks, Rich. Thanks, Malin. I see no more hands up. Are there any more? Oh, Louise, go for it.
And that question is, the self-identification of race and ethnicity is a voluntary action. How do we handle that?
How do we handle it? In what way, Louise? What are you asking? How do we get that data? Because people aren't necessarily providing it, or how do we?
Because people decide I don't want to self-identify in any of these ways, and they mark it on their employment form. I choose not to self-identify. Well, does that become just another class, just another category that we have to match to the Worcester to the county population? I don't know. I mean, maybe it is.
If I may
I think
respond,
that's
I just
also,
wondered if that discussion had been conducted.
I think it's also an HR lawyer compliance type of question in terms of what they can and can't require to be answered. And that's probably a pay grade above what we're doing here in order to figure that out.
I'm sorry, Jenny, I don't understand what you just said.
So in terms of what can be asked when somebody is either applying for a job or, whatever they're divulging about their personal identity, that is sort of an HR issue. It's not something that we can really dictate one way or another, because there's laws around that.
if I may.
Yep.
I think what Louise is saying is correct. I should amend it to say that, or note that this is voluntary, like you're saying. But I also think it was to me, it was one of the catch-22s in all of this. So I think we should track it separately, because I did find it interesting that we're trying to collect this data, but people don't want to give the data. So to collect that and separately and say that might be an area we have to work on, I think that's the only way to do it. How do we entice people to give data if it's becoming a large percentage of our statistics?
Understood. Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at too, is that it's a voluntary thing. It's not something that we can require anybody to report.
Yeah, and if I just extend Millen here, and that's the reason we tried to standardize, the recommendation that fits into that is, if there are systems or softwares that ask questions and, to collect this data, and, if town departments are able to use those systems, or probably their existing systems already have these kind of facilities, then we kind of ask that,
Melinda, you're
to
breaking
collect
up.
that data. Sorry, is it better now? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was saying, like, that's why we went into that recommendation to kind of standardize or make use of the current system to regularly update that information in order to widen the coverage. That was the intention behind that recommendation.
Is there anyone else that would like to comment or has questions for Rich or Millen? Deb, Deb, do you have your hand up, or?
Yes, I just had a question. Will this be presented in written format also? Or is it somewhere that I haven't seen?
So all of the reports are on the Google Drive.
They are already? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I can throw a link in the chat so that people can follow along.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I'm gonna throw the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Jean,
Thank you.
you're welcome. Jean, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one comment. One of the things that we've been talking about all the way along is one of our main objectives too is to be consistent across all town departments with this. So everybody is playing under the same rules and regulations. Each one doesn't have an individual, setup. And so again, as long as we can be consistent, I think that's a very important goal going forward.
Thanks, Jean. We'll need to look for those things when we're putting together the final report.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else?
This is Rich. I did get some comments on the waiver word, and I will correct that. I had a mistake in one of our sections on the school. I had it worded incorrectly in our meeting. Jean corrected me, so I looked back in my notes, and so I have a little different wording on that. And also the use of the word waiver with the civil service. I'll plan on correcting that or changing those words a bit.
Sounds good, Rich, thanks.
And then just one other comment is, like I think I mentioned before, I think we changed a lot of things to the word shall, and I don't know if that's appropriate. So as we're going through these, if anyone thinks for consistency, like I said, as we go through the different committees, if we should all be using the word shall or should or could or whatever, just to be, again, consistent. And then one other thing, I did receive some input from Louise and Kelly, so I'm not sure how to, I'm going to try to get with the team and go over those as best I can before we have to do the final report. So.
Okay. Louise, you have your hand up?
Yeah, while we have members of the school subcommittee here, can you clarify the way in which substitute teachers who are entering pedagogy from a different profession are treated? I think that I'm one of the people who sent comments to Rich, and they may have been born out of my own ignorance. Because what the version of the report that I read said was that testing requirements are waived for substitute teachers entering
Yes.
pedagogy from another profession.
That was incorrect. That was what I was trying to say. That was incorrect.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, then I'm perfectly satisfied.
So it was more, if I may, it was. I look back at the notes from our meetings, and they try to identify pathways that the substitutes and paraprofessionals, including receiving equivalency in Massachusetts for education received in other countries. So it's trying to get those, things that they've already done, get credit for them for foreign licensure and those kind of things. So it's not a waiver, but it's trying to get what they have already accomplished credit for.
That was what I believed to be true, and I also believed it to be true that the Commonwealth's Department of Elementary and Secondary Education offers pathways by which persons holding such equivalent credentials can receive kind of on-the-job training in pedagogy. Am I mistaken about that?
Yes, you're correct, Louise. That's what I was just going to say, that the Department of Ed has those alternate pathways. So it's not a waiver, but it's an alternate pathway, which is several different alternate pathways. And then, of course, they have the emergency certification for COVID, which is still happening this year too. But that's what I know.
Sure.
We do have a link for part of our resources, which we haven't included yet, but with the Department of Ed as far as those pathways go. So
They have a lot on their website also, if anybody wants to look into it.
Is that it for the employment committee? So before we move on, if I could ask Beth, if you could give a little bit of input recommendation on the shall, should little thing we're having here.
I think because these are recommendations, you would use the word should. I think shall is what you use when you are in like forcing someone to do something, or like, I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but shall just seems to be like, you're going to do this. and should seems more like a recommendation.
Right. Thanks, Beth. Oh, Maura.
I guess that's kind of a little question I have too, not just with regard to employment, but just in general. We're asking a lot here.
Mm-hmm.
So not that I don't think that we should, because we should, but or we not shall, but how do we do this, Beth, in a way that's not going to, I mean, I know that they're expecting this and that's our charge, but how do we do it in a way that they're not going to be like, oh my God, there's no way we're going to be able to get any of it, or, you know, how are we going to attack this and how are we going to do this? So how do we do this in a way that feels, you know, manageable with a kind of a strong push, but without being totally overwhelming? And maybe, yeah.
No, so I think that's a really good question, Maura, and it's one that I've been thinking through also, just knowing that we're so close to submitting this final report. And I've spent some time talking, you know, with John Wortman, actually, as recently as today, and also with the chair of the Board of Selectmen, John Samia, just sort of working through how we receive this report and what the task force can expect to happen at that meeting. And we're still working on those details, but here are some of the things that are kind of like the takeaways for me, right? All of these recommendations are recommendations. The charge of the task force was to provide a report of recommendations. And it's up to the Board of Selectmen to accept the report, right? But not necessarily take action the evening that the report is presented. I think that would be unrealistic. I think it's going to take time following the report being presented for the Board of Selectmen, who has to do the deliberations and the discussions in an open meeting, to decide how to proceed. And just looking at these reports, there's absolutely no way that every single recommendation is going to be implemented all at once. It just is impossible. I think we all know that. So what we're presenting to the Board of Selectmen basically is raw data about where we stand right now as a town. And then it will be up to the Board of Selectmen to decide what to do with the data that they've received and how to best proceed. And again, I can't speak to how that will look, but I do think that it's up to us as a committee to present this report, and then our job is basically done. It then becomes the role of the Board of Selectmen to figure out exactly how to start implementing these recommendations and a timeline for doing so. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I tend to get really ahead of myself, overwhelmed when I think too far ahead. So I think just focusing on getting a good report to the Board of Selectmen and then allowing the time, right? It took us a year to put this together. It's going to take time for change to occur and for these recommendations to be implemented.
Thanks, Beth. You had your hand up prior to that. Was there something else?
That's what I just wanted to weigh in on, because I was anticipating, and then Maura asked the question.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Maura. Paula. Oh, you're on mute.
I took my hand down but didn't put the microphone on. It's too many things at once. I think words matter. You know, when we're talking about DEI, we always say words matter and how you approach people and all that. I think the same applies here. I think using words like, you know, we recommend, or we, you know, based on the data, whatever, versus saying, you know, due to the inability to do this previously, or whatever. I think that, you know, that we need to be careful of being aggressive and what words we're using, because ultimately that's exactly right. They're going to take all of those recommendations and say, okay, what's our priority? I can tell you they're going to take the low hanging fruit and say, oh, here's some things we can do really easily, right? That we can implement, that people will start to see that we're doing something. And then there's some other things that are more difficult to do that they have to think about. I love the idea of the consistency across departments because it's pretty clear, I think, that they're not consistent, and that the school group has a really good plan because they already have professional development in place, and it's just part of their format and has been forever. But for me, it's all about the wording and how we present it. I think, as I was looking at some of the crossover in the reports, I think it's going to be important that we make some general recommendations, and that's where like continuation of a task force or some kind of citizens overview board that goes to me in a general sense, and then the things that are very specific to the categories.
Thanks, Paula. Lindsay?
Yeah, I think as much as is possible for those that we have collaborated with, who we have met with, right? So the heads of different departments. I think for each of the subgroups, giving a heads up about where the recommendations are. If you talk to them back, months ago, I know I haven't had a chance because our subcommittee hasn't met in the last couple of days, but Dr. Sawyer was interested, and I talked with John Wensey, the school committee chair, about potentially inviting the education subcommittee to have a conversation with the school committee at some point this fall, right? That it be seen as an opportunity for folks to engage. And then it might be an opportunity for us also to learn, like, oh, we already have that on our plan. It's on our 5-year plan, not our 3-year plan or our 1-year plan, or particularly the question about how fast things should move. Our job is we were convened in my mind to kind of build up some more pressure on this. And so it's not to sort of, necessarily pull back on that, but to also be a little realistic, because I don't want the members of the community reading something and think that a year from now, everything is going to look dramatically different and that these things do take time. So, I guess I would just encourage others who have met with particularly members of town government and who serve in roles, the fire chief, the police chief, and say, here's what our recommendations look like. I think that's common courtesy and will surely go a long way. Because many of those individuals have a lot of autonomy as well to do things and to make movements in addition to guidance they're receiving under the Board of Selectmen. Sorry if that's off topic, Ruth.
Thank you, Lindsay. Malin?
Yep. I'll just extend the same thought process that is going on, and Lindsay brought up a very good point. Is I think allowing each department to kind of come up with a plan in a timely manner, probably that can be a common recommendation. Like hey, based on this thing, come up with a implementation plan. Again, just overthinking or thinking out loud. But I think my question was more from a template perspective, going back to shall, should, could. I think similarly, there is another thing is, in the template, we were asked to give like a priority. And, the way we approached it is like, policy, we had like 4 recommendations. Recruitment, we had like 5, and, those sort of things. And, from a DEI lens, for all of us, we have been working, we are biased, like we are going to say like, oh, everything is important, everything is high priority. But within those groups also, we can bring down to like, oh, policy over recruitment or training over policy, those kind of things. But then within those also, a particular recommendation might be more pertinent than others. So my question is, should we assign a priority at each recommendation level rather than just kind of grouping at a policy, recruitment, training? And how do we want to go about it? And we don't have to get to the consensus now, but I think we should think as a group as to how we want to, articulate and present that in our final report.
Thanks, Marlon, for bringing that up. I feel that this has been brought up a few times, so maybe this is a good opportunity to discuss it. Beth, I'd like to ask, would putting in priorities, we're prioritizing these different recommendations, whether it's as a whole or within the subcommittees, would that really carry any weight? Or is it going to be more like Paula, and I know I had thought a similar thing, low hanging fruit, even if it's super low priority, if I can knock it out of the park, then I'm going to do that.
So I can only speak for myself and how I would approach this. I would approach it the way Paula was saying, like, I would pick the low hanging fruit. There are some things that when I read through, like the education report and the employment one, and I think maybe even the public safety one, that are going to be union issues. So sometimes there are timelines that are beyond the control of the Board of Selectmen and the town manager that need to be considered, that maybe this group isn't aware of, or I'm not aware of. So I think, while I think there could be value in prioritizing them, I don't think that it's probably the best use of our time as a task force, because I believe in the end of the day, like, we're just going to be able to take a look at this as a whole and proceed as one, like looking at it as one document, and proceed with the things that we can do pretty easily, because why wouldn't you? And then tackle some of the more difficult things as we can, because keep in mind, this is a priority 100%, but there's also 8 to 10 other priorities that have to be given the same type of attention, like our water, our sewer infrastructure, the budget. Like, there's a lot of different things that have to be, dealt with at the same time. So that's just my thought.
Thank you. I also, to add to that, think it would be pretty difficult, considering we only have about 5 weeks, right? And so only 3 subcommittees are presenting today, and then in another 3 weeks, the other 3, and that's the people putting the report together, working in between, and then sending it out for final approval. So, if we can't agree on a recommendation scheme, then, or priority scheme, that might be a little bit tight timeline. Does anybody have anything, Louise?
Yeah, I just want to make sure I'm clear on what Beth said. Because we are presenting to the Board of Selectmen, and it's up to them to deliberate and determine what can be implemented and on what timeline, it is therefore best that subcommittees remove priority rankings from the recommendations that we are submitting and simply order them in a logical way. Did I interpret that correctly, Beth?
I mean, that would be what I would recommend. As I just heard what Ruth was saying, like, it's probably going to be a deliberation to try to decide which is more important. Just list them, I think, and let the Board of Selectmen decide, because that was the charge, right? The charge was to provide recommendations to the Board of Selectmen in no particular order. And then that's the work of the committee. And then it's the work of the Board of Selectmen to determine which recommendations are going to be priorities and which are going to have to be put a little bit later on the timeline. Because again, I think we all agree there's absolutely no way that every single priority is going to be able to be implemented at the same time right away.
Right, and Louise, I don't think that the subcommittees have to resubmit their recommendations or reprioritize them, just to have some consistent. So right now they all look very different, or a little different. So the people that are going to be working on putting this report together, we'll have to come up with a way to make it more consistent. So unless any one subcommittee feels very strongly that it should be kept, in a certain order, we'll probably edit all of the recommendations so that they flow, or in a very similar format. All right. Oh, Jean, you have your hand up. You're on mute. You're on mute, Jean.
I think the selectmen will put them in priority when they read the report. That's why you have town government. You've elected these officials to guide you. So I think they will read them in detail, sit down with the manager and the human resource directors, and they will put them in priorities, and they'll give you a timeline, and they'll go from there. That's my comment.
Thanks, Jean. All right, so I think we're ready to move on to the next subcommittee's report, and that's housing. Jenny, would you like to report on that?
Sure. I'll read through the introduction that we wrote and then just kind of do a summary of the 2 recommendations that we had. The Housing Subcommittee wants to promote building trust among all groups represented and underrepresented in this community. As part of the committee's work, we looked at the data available from the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination and the Massachusetts Office of the Attorney General. This research revealed 6 incidents of housing discrimination reported over a 14-year period. As referenced in previous reports submitted to the Board of Selectmen, this is lower than expected when randomly distributed in proportion to population. That discrepancy undermines confidence that housing discrimination is low here. If housing discrimination is underreported, it could be because people do not know how to report it, they expect their voice will not be heard, or they do not believe that anything will change or improve. Members of marginalized and minority classes experience repeated microaggressions, which can lead to suppressed interest in social engagement and community involvement. The 2020 census showed that Shrewsbury has experienced a significant increase in diversity among its residents. To capitalize on the growth in diversity, Shrewsbury needs an informed and empowered population dedicated to ensuring housing equity within the community. Our 2 recommendations. One is to have sort of a landing page on the Shrewsbury Public website where there are resources available regarding housing education. So general resources for home buyers and renters. This would include things like, renters protections, etc. Also something about information about housing in Shrewsbury. So different housing options with links to all of these different resources that we included in our write-up. And then also a section on understanding the law around housing and discriminatory housing practices to provide further education for both landlords and renters that reside in the community. And then the other recommendation that we had was to, because, within Shrewsbury, we don't have a lot of, opportunities to do sort of housing education around, housing protections or even your responsibilities as a landlord. There are resources in other communities. One is the Resources for Communities and People, RCAP, which is in Worcester. And they do offer different education programs. But in order to make them fully accessible to people that live in Shrewsbury, we recommend it being offered at the public library or some other public location central in Shrewsbury, because not everybody has access to transportation or some other barrier, or can afford public transportation. There's different barriers. So it'd be nice to have that opportunity available in Shrewsbury, maybe on an annual or biannual basis. Both around renters' rights and then something available for landlords and building managers too, to keep up to speed about laws that are coming on the books. So those are the 2 recommendations that we came out with.
Thanks, Jenny.
Mm-hmm.
Does anyone have any comments, questions?
I think those are great.
Thanks, Paula. Melinda?
Thanks, Paula.
Yeah, Millen here. I was just thinking, was there any discussion or anything that you guys discussed about affordable housing and how that plays out, or did it not part of this committee? Like, did anything came up?
Louise, go ahead.
Hi, Melinda. I know that we were a little bit late about posting our draft report to the drive, but it is there now. And you will see that on the drive, we have links to information about affordable housing. I'm sorry, I can't cite the agencies off the top of my head, but it's organized in such a way that the first thing you see is information about finding housing or what to do if you're in a housing crisis. The second group of links talk about just information about housing in Shrewsbury. So there's a link to the town zones. There's a link to the planning committee. There's a link to the housing development plan. There's a link to the 10-year plan developed in 2016, so that you can get an idea of what is already in the community. And then in the third section, we finally say, if you have been, and also a link to the section that says, this is what you should do if you think you've been discriminated against. And in the third section, we have a group of links that go to the Massachusetts Committee Against Discrimination, the Office of the Attorney General, training that the Massachusetts Association of Realtors offers to tenants, landlords, and rental agents. So if you would look at that, if you have questions after looking at that, then feel free to hit us with them.
Thanks, Louise, for explaining that. Melinda, I hope that answers your question, but I'm just curious if you were asking about how outrageous housing is.
Yeah, that's what was like, there is an imbalance in affordable housing in Shrewsbury versus that. And that's where I was thinking, like, are there any recommendations around that? I mean, what you guys are talking about in the resource pool, I think the resources on webpage, I think all that is great. But then, if something is, we all know that affordable housing is a problem in Shrewsbury. And, did this team found out something that is there a low hanging fruit that can be done? Maybe not, but that's what I was alluding to.
Yeah. So I can say to that we met a few times with housing authority personnel, and we worked really hard. I actually learned a lot. And when I think when people hear the term affordable housing, they think truly affordable, but the definition is pretty pathetic. You have to make 80% of the median county income, right? So I think for this area, it's like over $100,000. That's like the median income, right? So you would have to still come in at 80,000 or so. Shrewsbury. So I don't think it's just Shrewsbury. I think all towns have to have 10% of new buildings be affordable housing. And Shrewsbury, they are working on that. I know that builders, there is a way around that. They have to pay into this fund that is a committee in Shrewsbury that is managing those funds, and they'll take that money to either rehab buildings that need rehab to build either affordable housing, or working with help me out here, guys. What we just voted for last
The Community Preservation Act
Thank you.
money.
Yeah. So affordable housing. I think it should be called something else because it's truly not affordable. Yeah. I don't know if Jenny or Louise, if you have anything to add to that.
No, just we did meet with Kristen last a couple of times actually, to get an update on sort of the 40B housing options in Shrewsbury, and kind of keeping up with us meeting the requirements, for each town in Massachusetts. So there are going to be some units in the new or the old Beale building when that gets rehabbed, and then we also have some in the one off Edgemere, right, Louise?
That's right. Yeah. And Melinda, if you want more numbers, it's in our report, or I can share it. It's in our last report. Well, it's in all our minutes, but it's in the DEI report.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there anyone else for housing?
Louise has her hand up.
Oh, Louise, sorry, go ahead.
Just one thing that I want to note, and that is, since we met with Kristen Glass and with the Shrewsbury Housing Authority, they should be advised of, as Lindsay said, they should get an advance heads up of what we are recommending.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, that was a really good recommendation. I think that we should all take heed.
Yeah,
I think
if you want stakeholder buy-in, you have to include them, right? So I think it's a really great suggestion.
Thanks, Louise. Thanks, Jenny. Is there anything else? Thanks, Helen. All right, so it's 7:59, almost 8 o'clock on the nose. Can we do a 5-minute break? And then when we come back, Leonora and her group will present for healthcare. Yep, great, fantastic. All right, so 8:05. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope everyone's back online. So, Leonora, I don't know if it will be you who will be presenting to the subcommittees, but if it is, the floor is yours.
The two things that we decided affect healthcare and to include all of the, excuse me, all of the town. The first one is that 3% of the population is under or uninsured, and there's a need for early childhood cavity prevention. The largest chronic illness for children is cavities. So we found out about the SEALS program, and it's run by the Department of Dental Health. And what happens is that they come into the schools with portable dental equipment and hygienists, and they apply sealants to the children. And sealants can help 90% of the, to prevent 90% of the cavities. And so actually, I just spoke with my dentist today, and she said that we said here that sealants should be available healthcare offering in all schools with 6 to 11-year-old students in Shrewsbury. She tells me that we shouldn't put an age because some children at 5 have their first molars. And she said, I see them at 6 and they already have a cavity. She also suggested we don't stop it at 11 because the last molars don't always come in by 12. She said, my son is 15 and his molars haven't come out yet. So we decided that we should strike the age of the students and just say school age children. So the program provides screening, it's education, it's dental sealants and fluoride. And if the child is in need of restorative services, they're referred to a dental clinic. The fiscal year budget for this would be 0 because it's already funded through the state. The budget, the recommendations for we said 2025 initially, and then we decided to change it to 2024. Even that might be too ambitious. The recommendation for the budget is 0. It's just getting the powers that be with the school committee to say, okay, we're going to do this. It, according to our research, it takes about 20 minutes from the child's classroom for them to have this done. And usually sealants are not covered. Even if they have dental insurance, they're not covered. But they're real important for them to have. And fluoride has been in water since 1959. But fluoride is different from sealants. Sealants will go over all the cracks and crevices, where fluoride makes the teeth strong, but sealants make the teeth the sealants make the teeth stronger.
I think you're looking for the word non-permeable.
That's the word. Thank you. So the SEALS program, we put a link to that so that you look at it. It's the Department of Public Health and the Center for Disease Control. Those are all supporting data. And that's the piece about trying to include everybody to have this important done for our school age children. The second thing that we focused on was the food insecurity. And food insecurity can affect your health in many ways. It can give you depression, it can give you anxiety. And the food bank has seen a tremendous increase in the need for volunteers and resources. What we found out was that the only food pantry in town is at St. Anne's Church. And they only are open one day a week on a Monday. They keep no records at all, and they do not turn anybody away. If they run out of food, they give them gift cards to supermarkets. The senior center has a very small food pantry, which is dependent on donations. So one of the things we're recommending is to increase the number of volunteers, to define the needs, to add more distribution days per week. One of the problems we were told is that the volunteers are elderly and they cannot lift the boxes that come in at the food bank for them to distribute at the food at the food pantry. So somehow maybe we could propose a budget for the food pantry for consistent food allocation. So it's not dependent on, like the one at the senior center, it's not dependent on donations. It's more, this is when it is. St. Anne's also, every third Monday, people can get meat and dairy, and that's the only day. So working with community organizations to advertise the need for volunteers. And this was allowed for larger donations to be available for pickup and distribution. And it might allow for another potential day of opening during the week. So we don't know the people who are going to St. Anne's, if they're in town or not. We don't know if they're coming from Worcester. And we talked about, how do we define that? And we really can't, unless there's something that they can come up with at the food pantry to say, this is how we're going to decide, is it just Shrewsbury residents or not? And understand the flow of food resources in the months when supplements are needed. Months are identified that require assistance. The food bank could tap into allocated funds. Maybe it's Christmas, maybe it's Thanksgiving, that they need more. The recommendation is for the 2022 fiscal year budget 0, doing an outreach initiatives. And then here, the recommendation for 2025, and we changed that to 2023. There's a budget here for $5,000, and we discussed that. Are we better off not to put a limit on the money? Hannah Kane sent us all kinds of supporting documents, which we included, and they're doing at the representative level a lot of, and they're included in here, a lot of the committees that they have, and food insecurity is a big one for them, and they're trying to establish acts that could help food donations to persons in need. Shrewsbury is considered, quote unquote, a wealthy town. However, 34% of the children at one of the schools get free lunch. So are those people going to get any dental health? This is something, again, we discussed. Sealants might be the only dental health these children have. And that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Leonora. Does anyone have any questions? Beth?
Thank you. Leonora, thank you for your report. Did St. Anne's happen to speak at all about the funding and food resources they receive from the Worcester County Food Bank? It was my understanding that the reason that they aren't able to ask if someone is a resident of Shrewsbury is because a lot of the food that they distribute is coming from the Worcester County Food Bank, which is serving all of Worcester County.
When we spoke with them, Zoya actually spoke with them. They said that they keep no records. And, you know, do we have them show their license so that we know they're a resident of Shrewsbury and turn everybody away? St. Anne's won't turn anybody away. Right, Beth, it should be that, you know, including all our town residents.
Zoya, you have your hand up. Do you want to answer that? Do you have any information?
When I talked to the people at St. Anne's, they said that during the COVID pandemic, they were not allowed to discriminate for residents of Shrewsbury only. They had to entertain everybody. But prior to that, they could have only for Shrewsbury residents. But during the pandemic, they were not allowed to discriminate.
And the pandemic obviously has a lot more people are needing food. And, you know, how do we say that just because someone is quote unquote living in a nice house, maybe they lost their job and they need food. You know, how do we make sure that everybody who needs this gets it?
Thanks, Leonora. Louise?
Thank you, Ruth. I want to mention that now that, and I can speak for St. Mary's, now that our CCD classes are going back to in person, we will once again be providing high school students to help with the unpacking. That used to be a service project that our high school students could undertake on a fairly regular basis at St. Anne's. So I think other churches in the community also provide volunteers, if I'm not mistaken. Volunteers who were not permitted to go there during the pandemic.
Thank you, Louise. Jenny?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I've always had this fantasy that, I mean, we have so many school ground campuses, and I know a lot of them have had some smaller gardens, but if there was some sort of effort that was undertook by, you know, both the schools and the community to really have a robust gardening option, you know, for citizens, that food could be donated and have something like, you know, the senior center or something, add more to their food allotment, or at during the warmer weathers, the Wednesday farmers market. You know what I mean? Free stuff.
It's a good idea.
Paula, you have your hand up.
So just along those lines, I'm not sure if the Shrewsbury Farmers Market is part of it, but there actually is a benefit with SNAP that if you go to a farmer's market, you get double money. So basically whatever money you spent at the farmer's market doesn't count off of your SNAP benefits, and they reimburse that money. So it's like getting double the benefits. Not a lot of people know about it. I think one of the things I would like to see is some kind of information session or something, being able to explain what SNAP is and who qualifies as well, because if I don't know if everybody knows this, but the DTA office is moving to the Big Y Plaza on Route 20. That makes it a lot more accessible to Shrewsbury residents than going downtown. May also be a little bit less stigmatizing for people because you can go there for SNAP. And if people are, I mean, I know this during the pandemic, if you were on free lunch, you automatically got a card sent to you, your family, for SNAP benefits because your kids weren't getting free lunch. So I think that might also be helpful versus trying to find, I mean, I think it's a two-prong approach. There's more places in the community that offer food banks, and trying to find out if there's a way to support St. Anne's to be open more often or with more people. I find it kind of weird that St. Anne's had their own volunteers but didn't accept outside volunteers or younger volunteers during the pandemic. But you know, that's St. Anne's. That's the way that they set
They
up
were
their parameters.
vaccinated, the kids
Where
weren't.
ah, that makes sense. I'm like, 'cause why wouldn't they just take any of the volunteers they could get? Um, I know I can also talk with my dad works at the food bank. My mother worked in the food bank in their town forever, and it is a church. Usually, it is a church undertaking, and but it's supporting it in some way. I can find out what they do in Stoughton.
Thank you, Paula. Zoya?
I'm not sure the farmers market would welcome a stall which is providing vegetables. I think that'll be counter to their trying to sell their produce.
Right.
Well,
but
if you're using your SNAP card, you basically are getting it free.
Right.
So you know you're buying from their vendors, which would be great. It's kind of the best of both worlds, right? If we could do that, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to also see if we could get SNAP to do a stall at the farmers market to give people get information.
Thanks, Zoya. Thanks, Paula. Louise?
Thank you, Ruth. I have 2 points to make. One of them is I know Noor's team at Alhambra has a community garden this summer, and they are actually graciously granting space to the St. Mary's Community Garden. And the folks who are growing at the St. Mary's Community Garden actually had to go to a food pantry in Northborough because there was not a facility in Shrewsbury that was accepting produce donations over the summer. So, and then the second point I want to make is, okay, great, we can make produce donations during the summer, but what do we do in the winter?
Go ahead, Leonora.
One of the things that we were told is that Panera Bread and Trader Joe's make donations to the St. Mary's Food Pantry. And I don't know if there's any place else we could tap into, maybe Price Chopper, maybe somewhere else that they would help support the program at St. Anne's. Also, Northborough has a food pantry, and it's run by volunteers. But we talked about that, and how do we get the volunteers to come in and look at every single can to make sure it's not out of date? It's not just having somebody go to a food pantry. It's all the behind the scene works. Who's going to rotate the stock? Who's going to look at all of it? And they get the donations from Trader Joe's and from Panera Bread, but my thought is they probably don't get the consistency. It's probably whatever's left over. And I don't know that, that they're getting any kind of consistent donations.
Beth, you have your hand up.
So, through the Rotary Club, of which I'm a member, prior to the pandemic, we were going every third Monday, which is the distribution day at St. Anne's. So I am aware of the donations from Trader Joe's and also from Panera. I can tell you they send quite a bit. You may not always know what's coming, but you can always count on produce, non-perishable items. And then from Panera, it was always like huge boxes of whatever was left over from the day before. So then the volunteers would, put on gloves and then separate things into the smaller bags to give out to the clients of the food pantry. The other thing about St. Anne's that I think is really important to note is that it's all done by volunteers. No one there is taking a salary, and it's basically 2 women that run that food pantry. And many of the people that volunteer in the food pantry are clients themselves. So they're helping out, and then they take what they need for food and they go on their way. Prior to the pandemic, some of their funding came from their thrift store. And a lot of the things that they were selling in the thrift store were coming from the TJX companies. But the pandemic changed all that, and they've recently had to close their thrift shop. And so now there is no more thrift shop. And what they've done is they've changed that space that was the thrift shop into more of a grocery store setup for the clients of the food pantry, so that they're better able to choose their food. Prior to that, any sort of distribution was done basically in the parking lot of the church. So there was no place downstairs because of the thrift shop. So when you would go to help out, you would be taking, let's say, 80 to 100 bags, like grocery bags, like a grocery bag filled with canned goods and dried goods, then double bagged in plastic bags up the stairs of the church and into the parking lot. And that's where people would come to collect their food. And it didn't matter what the weather was, if it was cold, if it was raining, everything was done in the parking lot on tarps. So it is amazing what St. Anne's is doing with basically a crew of very few volunteers. So again, if people are interested in helping St. Anne's, the large food distribution is always the third Monday of the month. And it's very easy to get in touch with the director of the food pantry, Melinda Nyes. And if anyone wants her information, I'm happy to provide it. You can just message me. I know she's always looking for volunteers. I know that this group is, not going to continue past, October when we wrap up our report. But that doesn't mean that it's not something that we might like to do as a group, as a way of kind of closing out our time together, to give some of our time to St. Anne's, because it truly is a safety net for the community and they can never get enough help.
Thank you, Beth. That was some really good information. I'm just curious, for the third Monday of the month, when are they doing that? Is that in the evenings or is that during the day?
No, in my past experience, I've gone down about 8:30 in the morning and they get everything set up. And then it's like 10 to 12 that people come and are able to take their food. Honestly, just to see it once, it's, even if you just went to watch, it's something to see.
Thank you, Beth. Leonora?
Someone suggested that there was a food pantry at Oak Middle School, but there is not right now.
Right, but that's because of COVID, but they're planning to reopen it again yeah. And it was really only, so this is what I'm thinking, like with all of this great information that, we're all coming together here is, how can we all kind of do this all together, and kind of bring our forces to make it stronger for everybody. Because it was specifically for Oaks families, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. So I think we've had some nice connections here there. Thanks for your good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Maura. Thanks, Leonora. Zoya?
My question was, would it be possible to have another day at St. Anne's instead of just one day in a week? Because one day in a week, if it's a family of 5, that food probably finishes in 2 or 3 days. Would it be a possibility? Can the town help in any way of having another day where they can have the food from the St. Anne's Bank?
I don't know if anybody can answer that freely.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in. I can speak to it a bit. So currently, Zoya, and that's a really good question, even though St. Anne's provides service to the community, they aren't funded at all through town appropriations. And so I'm listening to this conversation, and I think what I'm hearing is a recommendation to widen our safety net of social services to include St. Anne's. And I mean, that's something that we've talked about in the past as a Board of Selectmen also, is how do we manage the safety net? We provide appropriation to SYFS, but yet not to St. Anne's when they do work together and often with the same clients. One more mental health, one more food insecurity, but both equally important. So maybe that's a recommendation.
I love that.
Thanks, Beth. I think that one of the recommendations in there now can be slightly edited to say that. Lindsay, you have your hand up.
Yeah, this conversation's been really great about food. I'm wondering if I can just pivot us back to the dental screenings for a minute. It looks like I was trying to research it a little bit, Lenora, while you were talking, and it looks like the Mass Department of Public Health targets schools that have a greater than 50% participation in free and reduced lunch, but I could be looking at old data. Do you know if we could still participate, or anyone in your group know if Shrewsbury could participate since our free and reduced lunch is not that low? Or are we thinking that we come up with a program similar, but that we somehow fund it kind of internally?
But Lindsay, I don't think we looked into that at all.
Okay.
So I think that is one area we need to look into before we make the recommendation.
Okay. The fact sheet I have, Zoya, I can't tell when it was published that I'm looking at, so I'm not sure. And maybe it's another opportunity. Certainly, if we can get, I also just wonder, because it's DPH hygienists, how many DPH hygienists have been repurposed during COVID to do other things? I have no idea. But if we, and I guess I just wonder if we think about that a little bit more, is the goal is it to offer screenings to all students, or parents who sort of opt in, or families who are free and reduced lunch? Did you guys think about the scope of what that might look like?
We did think about the fact that there will be many students whose parents can afford it. Will they be willing to be part of the school sealant program, or would they have it separately? We could not get any information on that because we did not do any survey of the schools of the parents.
And also with that, we were looking maybe to even partner with some of the community colleges, because I know that we were introduced to the program where the community college might have some kind of outreach that they can provide that service to the school.
So it sounds like sort of a program that we might more specially curtail, maybe not using the DPH hygienists, but come up with our own program, or some sort of Frankenstein version of a program, part DPH and part something else.
Correct.
Okay.
For Leonora and the other members of the healthcare committee, you don't have to raise your hand. You can just answer if you have a response.
Okay.
I think there are community colleges that do provide assistance to schools, children, communities. Quinsigamond Community College, which is very, very close. They have a dental hygiene program, and I know they do outreach. And I have a friend that works there, and she kind of explained what they do and how it's done. So if that's something that someone's interested in, I think I gave Lenora her name.
You did, Deb, and that's a good suggestion for a resource that we can tap into, because obviously the students that are hoping to be hygienists need to have some practical experience. I don't know if they do a clinical portion or if we implemented these in the schools. And Lindsay, to speak to what you were saying about 50% of the students, I know 34% of the ones at Coolidge receive free lunch. So I don't know if we can go school by school and try to find out how many kids get free lunch. And Louise directed us to some really good information, and they actually had centers of the town in different colors, and that one that was 34% was in red. But there was every portion, every location in town was included, and we got the 34%, but we did not go any further than that. at this point, but we can.
Yeah, please take my comments are all in support. I'm just trying to figure out how to make it happen. If there's money in this program or we needed something else, certainly all of our schools have kids who are on free or reduced lunch, and the ratios change. Coolidge won't be. Coolidge was a little bit of a higher outlier as in terms of our elementary schools. With the redistricting, that's a little less true. Got some experts on here who know more about this than I do on our redistricting committee, but. I'm not saying there's not need. I'm just trying to figure out, can we apply for this program, or are we sort of saying this program is a model for us to create something similar, even if we can't maybe benefit? And it seems pretty small too. So I could imagine DPH throwing their money at some of the more urban centers, right, where need is particularly high. So we might have to come up with something on our own. But happy to get more numbers if that's helpful.
There are also other avenues, not just for children, but the clinic at they have very low cost cleaning and x-rays for adults and children. And then there is a dental clinic at the Kennedy Health Center in Worcester, and they provide a lot of, very reduced dental work for people. That's the other thing I wanted to say about St. Anne's. They do a wonderful, wonderful job. But the church that I belong to, we do collect food and we take it to St. Anne's. That has kind of stopped a lot because of but that has been in the past, and maybe have more centers like.
Is anybody else hearing that, or is that just me?
No, I hear it.
Deb, we were getting a lot of radio static there. Deb, we can't hear you, or we're getting a lot of static, or.
It's actually Leonora when she comes off mute, I think.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Deb, would you like to try again?
I'm hearing a lot of noise.
Okay, go try it now, please.
I was just saying that, there are other clinics very close to Shrewsbury where they provide low-cost dental care to families, children and families, and that might be something that we our community. And then also there are other, like my church, would collect food to St. Anne's. Maybe we could.
I'm sorry, Deb. I'm sorry to cut you off. Is anybody else having a hard time hearing?
Yeah,
us?
she's coming in and out.
Deb, if you could call back in, that would be great. If you'd like to come back onto the call and get that point across. Otherwise, I'll go to the next person. There are no more hands. Are there any more questions for Leonora or the rest of the healthcare group?
One of the things that we talked about was opening an addition food pantry, not just the one at St. Anne's. Can we get the funding? Can we get the volunteers? And we have a recommendation here of how we can get more volunteers, but maybe it's people just don't realize what the need is in town. Again, we're a wealthy town.
Lynn?
Thanks, Milind here. So is there a way to kind of have local businesses, tie up with like Worcester Food Pantry or something to kind of have a program for just town, to donate more food or something? Like I know, like my company is in Boston, and we always spend like enterprise level, like a community service, and like we have like 2 days in a year that we go as a company to Boston Food Pantry to spend our time as part of our volunteering service, and do whatever their need is on that day, or the schedule thing. So we do that. So similar to that, can we do that here as part of it to benefit the folks or the families from our town or nearby towns? Just a thought.
So you're suggesting that as a recommendation, and who would lead that, like the town?
I don't know. That's a good question. Is there something like, I know there are some business associations like 495 Business Council, or we have like some of these business councils in like Lakeview Business Council area or something that we can partner with to just do that localized. And I know this is a report going to the town, but again, probably town can help us or point in that direction to help make connections. I don't know. Again, just thinking out loud.
Thanks, Malin. Let's see who had their hand up first. Louise.
Thank you, Ruth. I wonder if we dare convert or ask the healthcare committee to convert its recommendation or to direct its recommendation to the town board of health, and ask the town board of health to acknowledge that if our students are not eligible for the SEALS program because we have fewer than 50% of them on reduced lunch, it is still a municipal responsibility to be assumed. That is to say, to look forward to providing adequate health care for these children, adequate dental health care for these children, given the magnitude of dental caries as a problem. And I see Jenny's hand is already up. But what that recommendation would do, if the Board of Selectmen agree to it, is allow, the way I see it, it would allow the Board of Health to do things like call up the SEALS program and say, hey, we don't make 50%, we make 36%. What can you do for us? It would allow the Board of Health to reach out to all of the dentists in the community on behalf of the community and say, we have these kids who need us to create some sort of a program modeled after the SEALS program for which we are not eligible. Right? So I think it's really just a question of asking the Board of Selectmen to make this part of the Board of Health mandate. And on that, I will release the floor.
Thanks, Louise. So, Jenny, if you don't mind going next, because I know you're in that space, and then we'll go to Jane.
Sure. No, thank you for raising that, Louise. I mean, I think it is something that could be presented to the Board of Health, and then working with our Worcester Health Department, because we fall under the Worcester Health Department and then the Central Mass Health Alliance. So trying to leverage some resources there.
Thanks, Jenny. Jean, you're up. Don't forget to unmute. Jean Budenhagen? No, you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
In reference to the food pantry, maybe this is a project you should give to the senior center. You've got paid, two people that are paid. One is an outreach individual, another is a volunteer individual that the town pays. They're part of the town, payroll, and give them this project to look into an additional food pantry. Could be a great project for them.
Yes, being that you're a Rotarian, do you think it would be a project for the Rotary Club to take on? That they help with this?
Which project? Creating a food pantry?
Yes.
Unfortunately, our Rotary Club is rather small. I'm not sure that we would be able to take on something like that on our own, which is why we've always chosen to support St. Anne's. I do know that the Rotary Club just partnered with the Rotary Club of Worcester to fund a program through UMass that's providing food for people who are undergoing treatment and may have special dietary needs or restrictions. And so we are helping in that capacity. But we are not necessarily the strongest club in terms of people power. So take this as a plug for joining our Shrewsbury Rotary Club, because we could always use people with great ideas and always use more hands. But again, I think it's also just important to let people know that as a member of the Board of Selectmen, I can tell you that there are conversations in place, taking place about how we can better serve the community of food insecure individuals and families. And it's something that we're trying to work through, because we have a wonderful safety net in Shrewsbury, but it isn't necessarily well connected, and it isn't necessarily easy to access if you don't know who to ask or who to go through. And so trying to bring that together and make it easier for people to have their needs met at in times when they are, at their most vulnerable, is very important to the entire board, and something that we are looking at and discussing with the town manager. So these recommendations are great. I'm also just not sure how much the Board of Selectmen can compel the Board of Health to do anything also. So I think we need to just be careful there with just how much one board can tell another board what they should be doing.
Thanks, Beth. So I'm just going to take that as my opportunity to do a little segue to the landing page that has been brought up a few times. So I think that having the landing page have some of these resources that we've just talked about, right, under the healthcare, healthcare tab, or maybe, so I don't know if people will necessarily know to look for food resources or maybe dental under healthcare, but maybe not food. So maybe social net or safety social net or something like that tab. So if all of you can send along web links to things that you'd like highlighted in, to organizations, or any kind of information that you'd like highlighted on the landing page. So just to give a little bit of background, for those of you who aren't sure what I'm talking about, out of the DEI, we'd like for there to be a landing page for residents to go to that has information about all of the information that all of the subcommittees have worked on throughout the last year. So please send those along however you can. It doesn't have to be formal. Are there any, Jean, you still have your hand up, is that right or no? Are there any other questions for Leonora or the rest of her team? Okay, so next on the agenda is just general, an opportunity for just general questions. Does anybody have anything else? So our next meeting is September 15th. It's on a Wednesday. And so the other three subcommittees will present. I don't think we're having, hold on before I speak out of time. Storytellers is supposed to present. I apologize. Storytellers, there's only about 10 or 11 minutes left.
Hi, this is Roop. We could make it happen in 10 minutes.
Awesome. Go for it.
Okay. So it's a little different approach. As you know, we were working with narratives, and the goal here was to capture resident voices. And so, we tried to do an endeavor where we can make our residents part of a conversation and have our stories, whatever we gather, tie into our report, and do all of this in a safe space that is, a town approved space where people can share and their experiences of exclusion or DEI experiences or positive experiences, whatever they may be. The goal was obviously to also stimulate new conversations, and obviously narratives are not about purely fact finding. They lead us where they lead us. So I'll read out a little bit from my introduction, which I think is valuable very quickly. Our subcommittee was established to gather stories that support the work done in other subcommittees. We reached out to our residents via many channels such as Facebook and the Community Advocate and the town website. We did have a panel discussion on SMC to educate residents about our mission and call for stories, and residents were encouraged to share stories and illuminate us about our collective understanding of how Shrewsbury can be more inclusive as our home. About 20 participants shared their stories, and it is important to note that all of these participants were over the age of 18. To read anecdotal vignettes, by the way, people under 18, the Shrewsbury High School students and alumni have an Instagram page which people can visit. And also the unofficial Town of Shrewsbury pages provide evidence around the diversity, equity, and inclusion social climate in town, and conversations about racism often get uncomfortable in those spaces. We collected a lot of stories that are in various realms, whether they are about people who are differently abled, about lack of accommodations, microaggressions and systemic racism, and etc. The stories are quite revealing, and they definitely speak for themselves. And if you guys have not had a chance to read these, I would really encourage you to take out some time and have a look at them. We did have a barrier in that we could not provide complete anonymity vis-a-vis our stories, even amongst the participants that we did have, 62% of them were looking for that. And people do always feel afraid and think about any kind of backlash, because stories are obviously not easy to share. Think about the impact at their workplace, whether they would offend connections that they have in town, what difference will the stories make anyway. So it's not easy. The lack of ability for our subcommittee to be face-to-face with our participants definitely affected our ability. It's worth a mention that it affected our ability to hold listening sessions. We did observe citizen behavior on unofficial Facebook pages that was racist, hurtful, showed a lot of age bias and a lack of respect when a healthy dialogue was attempted on issues such as critical race theory and the colonial mascot issue in town. This behavior does hold people back from sharing in any forum that may be publicized, such as ours. All of us, I was definitely very disappointed, that a lot of our own networking also didn't yield as many results and more stories than, and this might have been a reason. Our recommendations are not conventional recommendations, as you can imagine. What we would like to say as a subcommittee is this. One is that until the community responds in a way that shows that we will not tolerate personal attacks due to difference of opinion or background, micro and macro aggressions will continue. We recommend ways to educate each other on our differences, like more public festivals that are rooted in, various cultures, connections of public employees with the community at large to see each other as people versus position, and events such as the Diversity Fair that affords opportunities to share language, food, music, etc. A public space where meaningful interactions can occur is definitely critical to creating a more equitable town space. We recommend that we make space for stories to be shared while respecting confidentiality. We also recommend hiring a DEI director that can mindfully lead this work forward. And definitely that all committees like the Education and the Employment Committee tap into the narratives to learn more from what they have to say. Paula and Noor, feel free to jump in and add to what I said.
Sure. Thank you, Roop. I think you did a beautiful job summarizing everything for us today in this short period of time that we had left in today's meeting. I do want to say that as a qualitative researcher, 20 participants is a very solid number. And if you tie this data in with the 200 plus that the quantitative survey team got, I think the results kind of speak for themselves. They're all pretty much saying the same thing, whether it's in number-based data or through the stories. The stories will speak for themselves, and I think that it's not worthy. It would devalue the stories if we were to summarize them in today's meeting. I really do think that they have to be read to be experienced. I also think that the recommendations are unconventional from us because the charge of this subcommittee was to collect the narratives, and that's what we did. If you look at the stories, you will see a lot in them for education. I think that that was the heaviest side that we saw, where people shared their experiences within the unit of education in the town of Shrewsbury. We had some stories that related to public safety. We had some that related to accessibility, and not really any for housing, I'd say, not really any for health, at least in the stories that we gathered. So really education is a lot. People spoke a lot about their experiences of microaggressions, of outright discrimination, of racist slurs, and those types of things. And I think it's also important to say that the anti-racist work that needs to continue definitely sits smack dab in the center of a color binary, but we also saw a lot of experiences where people were facing discrimination because of age, because of religion, and just being different. So I think there's, yeah, definitely a lot of work that needs to be done there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Thanks, Nora. Are there any questions, comments regarding this work?
I just want to add that the way, so we were formed as a subcommittee because we had to be a subcommittee to do the work, right? So really, sort of our thought process with it was that any other subcommittee could take a piece of this report and use it to help bolster your recommendations. So if there, this may not be the best way to present this information, may not be to present it as a standalone report, but maybe instead to integrate it into some of the other recommendations that are being made.
Thanks, Paula. All right, so are there any last minute comments or questions? Rich.
I guess just I was going to say I think it would be a good summary, or in the total or the beginning of the report as a summary. I think it would just be good to reference those for people that don't think it exists here. Just to say that it is a small town, and some people don't think we have these issues, but this is just a very small sampling from people who are willing to come forward, which is a big effort, to get people to come forward because of the things we mentioned. And just, I think it would be worth an upfront thing just to say.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that's really important because sharing a story is brave work. It makes you vulnerable, and also it takes a lot of effort. Like especially in this case where people were not doing audio or video recordings primarily, they were writing. It had to be a person who was going to be able to write a narrative for us. There were very few audios or phone interviews that we did. So that's definitely something. And I do think that something that we need to consider as a town, not a thing to discuss as a task force perhaps, but as a town, is to think about anecdotal evidence that one gets from non-confidential sources, or also pay attention to the climate that we're seeing on social media or seeing on these Instagram pages. And just because these things don't get reported, like if this was to be reported in the school system, yes, I know action would be taken, but that doesn't mean that if these things are not being reported, we can pretend like they don't exist. So I think that's just a really important point to consider here.
I agree, Rich and Noor. I just want to add that, we have, every time somebody shared a story, they knew that, at least the subcommittee knows which email these things came from. It takes a very brave person to say, it's something quote unquote official. And we are honoring these stories by putting them down on record in our report. And that means a lot. And that absolutely, like Rich, you said, these things exist and they have to be acknowledged in the right way, because it's very important. And yes, we encourage you all to have a look at the stories.
All right. So, Louise.
Thank you, Ruth. Just one quick thing, and that is, are you going to I got an updated version of the report from the one that I looked at yesterday from Noor this morning, and it seemed to me that your assessment of the anecdotal evidence available in social media was kind of floating around in a very disconnected way inside of other things. Are you planning to rewrite that in such a way?
No, I'm not. That's an inaccurate reading. The social media piece that you're seeing is only the introduction of the report itself. It does not appear anywhere else. So once you're done with the intro paragraphs, you get into the positive stories, and then you get into the rest of the narrative. The entire narrative that you're seeing beyond the introduction is entirely based on participant responses for this study. So that social media narrative is not a part of the main thing. It's only given in the introduction, and the purpose for that was, like, you have 20 participants, and having 20 participants does not mean that the study can be dismissed, because we are seeing an extant social climate that exists.
So, Nora, I don't think that's what Louise is getting at. I think what Louise is saying is we're dancing around the fact that there's an issue on social media, and that what we're seeing on social media is some pretty blatant racism, some pretty blatant ageism, sexism. It's all in there. All the isms are in there. We hit pretty much every category in those pages. I think that's what I think Louise is asking. Is that we've sort of danced around it, and you can see it in the stories, but we don't come right out and say.
No, actually, Paula,
right?
let me
Is that
speak
what
for
you're
myself.
asking?
What I was suggesting, Noor, is that in addition to the way that this is introduced in the preface or introduction, as you want to call it, that you put in, that you reiterate this either in the conclusion, because you just said you cannot disregard these 20 stories. We honored them, we captured them, but these stories are representative of something that anyone who participates in social media can see on any random day of the week.
Noor, can I add to this?
Go ahead.
So there are two things, Louise. I think the stories absolutely reiterate and focus to what our introduction says. It is a testament to what goes on in social media. And the second thing is, I don't think it was our assigned task we could do a whole different project on what's going on Facebook and all these forums and analyze that. Because there is absolutely a lot over there to analyze, but that was not part of the task assigned here.
That's fine. But as Noor said, if the 20 stories that were provided do reflect what's captured on social media, then I think it deserves to be mentioned in a place other than the introduction. And I will stop there because we are over time.
If there are no last comments or questions, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Thanks, Lindsay.
That was Lindsay.
Who seconded?
Jean.
Thanks, Jean. Have a good night, everybody. We'll see you soon, okay? Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.